Amen. Amen. He lives. He lives, and so I can face tomorrow. He lives, and so I can face anything that life throws at me. I know that now because the joy of coming back to the Lord is one of those things. You get to see things in a new perspective. You see things differently. And I wanted to share, when Joanne asked me about coming out, she said, I want you to share your testimony. And she's probably seen snippets of it when she's seen me. And I thought it was fitting that when I was thinking about a song, a hymn, I wanted to do a traditional hymn. I like doing traditional hymns, marinate that with a bit of the gospel flair. And when Adrian suggested He Lives, I thought, wow, this song is just so fitting of my testimony. So, Father, I just want to thank You for who You are and how great You are in our lives. And Father God, may You go before everything that I say today. May You be in every word. May light and life truly be renewed, revived only in You, Jesus. So we thank You, God, for the outpouring of Your Spirit in us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I titled this Ordered Steps for a couple of reasons. And the Bible in Psalms, I think Psalms 37:23 talks about the steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord. And I thought, my life in a nutshell, where do I begin? So you'll hear snippets about growing up in Jamaica, snippets about the encounters I've had and what God has done for me. So growing up in Jamaica, while, for Canadians, you're like, come on, you're surrounded by water, it's beautiful, what? It's going to be awesome. It probably was, but growing up at the time, I didn't see the wonder and the splendor of living on an island. I understand that now that I'm in Canada man, how did I miss all of that for the years that I've lived there? And so growing up there, it was interesting. And, I think every person in this room has faced some sort of life adversity. Some people have had great lives, and God bless them for the folks who've had a stellar run. Woo, power to you. But there are those of us who have had challenges. Somebody would say testing of encounters, and God used what I would say my mess to make it into a message, and so I'll share just a bit of that. I want you to know that you're looking at a recipient of grace. You're looking at somebody who's overcome a few life hurdles, and some of those hurdles, I think, directed the way my life, the trajectory of my life changed. So I grew up in a semi-Christian home. My daddy was a preacher. My mother was a rebel for the devil, and I don't know how they came together. So my mom would be the lady who would see church folks walking by the house, and she would turn on the loudest reggae music she could find. And she, my mom was the vice principal, but the vice principal was mouthy, and so she would say some not so Christ-like things, if she saw people coming by. And it was like, don't know how. But living in the house with a dad who was running crusades on the island and stuff, I heard about Jesus. I really did. We had morning worship, evening worship, all of that stuff. But I never met Jesus. So I heard of Him as saving grace and all of that stuff. But I personally never met Him till a few years ago. But in such a scenario, the encounters that I had at the time, some of them were painful, and it was one of those things that it caused for pause and reflection. Some of those life hurdles eventually caused me to be hurt, angry. I'd say bitter, but I'd say very bitter. And those things started taking root in my life that I didn't even know that these were things I was attaching to my identity and owned them So, I'd be like, I'm not talking to so-and-so, and I'm okay with that. And I made peace, and, malice became a normal part of me. So I'm not talking to anybody. And it was like, yeah. And so in my home, my dad gave us the opportunity at 18 to say, at 18, you all can leave. You can do whatever you want at the age of 18. So we still had to show up for morning worship, do all of that stuff. But at 18, choice became an option. And the minute choice came for myself, my brothers, as soon as they turned 18, they moved out. I got to 18, so you can forgive me a little bit. A rebellion came in, and so, in a Christian home back in Jamaica, very traditional. We wouldn't do earrings, we wouldn't do cutting off your hair, very traditional. At 18, I got double piercing, and I shaved off the side of my head. And my father probably thought, wow, the devil done came and take this one too. So it was kind of hard as a preacher man going around the island talking about Jesus, and your children are doing the total opposite. And so in doing that, I realized, this world thing is kind of nice. But I didn't know the other aspects of what was coming down the road. So in doing the world thing, as mentioned earlier by Ron, thank you again for that, about traveling the island singing with these performing arts group. And it was beautiful because they exposed me to just music on a different level. And music was truly my escape. But it was music on a different level. Getting to travel the world and singing in reggae bands and, sharing some of the spaces with, like prom. I won't get into them because, they need Jesus. So no matter how great they are on the reggae stage, without salvation, it's a doomed end. And so, but I got the opportunity to see, and travel, and it was good, but there was something lacking. While in the performing arts world, God encountered a scenario that the group I was in, somebody had to come and audition for that group, and we were teens at the time. And this young lady came, and she came not to audition, she came for her friends. And she came to audition, her friends came to audition, she was there as a supporting cast member. Her friends didn't get in, she was pushed to audition, she auditioned, and she became my friend. And after some interesting scenarios, her home became my rescue because I was going between homes. My daddy's preaching, so he's not home. My mom had migrated, so she's not home. And it was like, okay. And where I lived, a lot of the girls were unfortunately getting pregnant. And it's so interesting that the Bible talks about, all things working together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. The Bible said that, but at the time I didn't necessarily know that. And so I'm thinking about every step that I had to pursue. Some of them didn't feel good. And you're thinking, God, where are you? And so because I was thinking in my rebellion, I'm going to leave you alone, Jesus, let me do me. If you said the name to Jesus to me, I'd be very offended. Because I was looking at my father going, if he's what Jesus is about, I do not want it. And so my sister, she eventually became my sister and a place of refuge. We would go on singing tours together, and it was beautiful. But for every time we would be doing stuff, we were like two great peas in a pod. The only thing is there's a rebellious pea and a peacemaking pea. And so I'd be the person to, God really worked on me. I'd be the person to get in your face, and she'd be the person to say, or I'd be the person who wanted to fight you. Mind you, I've never really fought anybody outside of my brothers. I really can't tell if I'm really good. But I'd be the person to fight you. And she would quietly say, well, yeah, you should fight them. But she's not going to come out loud and say, no, go at it. But she was always somebody who was the voice of reason. And I didn't connect it till a few years ago that, oh my gosh, the steps of a man are ordered by the Lord and called according to his purpose. So we truly need people to be in our corners. When the Bible talks about everything working together for the good, it didn't say that everything that we encounter is going to be good. And some of the things that I won't necessarily get into explicit details about some of those things, but in terms of abandonment, experience it, wasn't good, made me bitter. Exploitations, won't get into it, but it wasn't good. And you're thinking as a preacher's kid, you know what, there should be some sort of refuge that you could run to, or, being a strength. I didn't see it. And so I figured with all these unhappy endings, which is what this earth is about. It never said we're going to see, perfect lives here on earth. We're going to experience some things, but there is our refuge and our strength, who is in the Lord. But at the time, I was probably Jonah's little distant cousin, just running like I refused to come home, like refused. And so after the death of my grandfather, I had to sing at his funeral, and I met him just briefly. It's not one of those relationships where you're really tight with your papa. I didn't have that. But I sang at the funeral, and somebody said, "Wow, you have such a beautiful voice." I said, sometimes you hear it. In the secular world, you hear it and you go, "Oh, I know." But in the faith world, I've learned to come to this place of, you know what? I don't want any credit because I've lived the vanity of it, and I know what's on the end of that, and I don't want that. But when they said you had such a beautiful voice, I thought, okay. And the gentleman said to me, wouldn't it be beautiful for your grandfather to hear you sing in heaven? And that thing hit me like a ton of bricks. Because for the first time, it really was like, whoa, what am I doing? Here I was advancing the kingdom of darkness. I didn't think it was. But for every gig that I did, for every performance that we did, it wasn't about Jesus. So if it's not for good, it's for evil. There's no in between in that perspective. And so God knew that my destiny was shaped to be going, let's say I'm supposed to go on the 401, and I decided I was going to take all the back roads to get to Pearson. And it's like, no, you could just simply get on the 401 and get to Pearson. And in my walk, I decided I want nothing to do with church. But when I met my sister, she kept on reminding me about Jesus. And sometimes I would say to her, sometimes you kind of annoy me because, I really want to stay bitter. I want to stay in this rut. You want to stay in your mess. It's good down here. It probably gets you attention. And she refused to allow me to stay there. And I keep reiterating that for a couple of reasons, is that not only do you want people coming alongside you, you want those folks who are truly standing in the gap for you, because your salvation might just be on the other end of that. You want to ensure that those that you're speaking to, you're pouring into them, that they are not just empowered for their own purpose, but our commission was to really make disciples. And the gospel is not just for us to keep it to ourselves and just our families. And so sometimes how you live, how you work, how you conduct yourself, in traffic, somebody cuts you off, do you wave your hand and say, "The Lord bless you, have a great day"? Or you get what I'm saying? You really want to ensure that those who are speaking to you are speaking life into you. And so as I moved to Canada back in 2006, with my Canadian husband, who's from the Caribbean, so that's why we gel very well. We moved here. I had a mindset. I started working with a prominent institution, and I had this career thing going. Music wasn't working out. As I was telling around this morning that, God kind of made me go silent for a little bit, so I couldn't get gigs. I moved to Guelph, and it was almost like I became a no-name, and that was difficult. I remember I phoned my sister once. I had auditioned for a play, and I thought, I've got this. And they were like, "Well, it's so great to have you. However, we would have to write in a role for you, so we're sorry." Hearing that from me for a play, and I'm going, I'm a theater baby. This is what I know. And to hear no, I was getting into depression. And my sister, while she was, trying to be kind, she was also harsh. The play was The Sound of Music, and she says to me, "Okay, Verese, get it together. Did you ever see a black person in The Sound of Music?" But in my heart, I'm going, no, you can be anybody in the theater world. And, she was always there just to, But my true reckoning came about 4.5 years ago. And if I get emotional, there's always a rationale behind it. But 4.5 years ago, my life literally went into the balance. I was pregnant with my last child, and it was One of those things, I was not happy, the truth be told, because I had the career mindset, I'm going up, working up the corporate ladder, and I'm good. The older two are, functioning on their own. They can, I don't have to walk behind them or do anything, I'm good. And I'm now expecting. And my husband was like the, thrilled mother, when we got the news. So the doctor says, "Oh, you guys had a great time in Jamaica." And my husband's like, "Yeah, what are you going to tell us?" It's like, "Yeah, you're expecting again." And he's like, "Yes!" And I'm sitting there going, okay. I didn't take it very well. And it's one of those stories that I will eventually, in the future, have a conversation with my Jo, because if I share my testimony over and over, I don't want her to think Mommy didn't want her. But in my mind at the time, I'm going, God, you kind of know I'm all right. Like, I'm good. And so, as I mentioned, it was a difficult pregnancy to the point of dehydration. So I had to be admitted to the hospital a couple of times for fluids. And then I developed 2 abdominal hernias. And they couldn't do surgery. So I was in immense pain. So I'd have a good mobility, walking 1, 2, 3, and then the pain hits. And I'm going like 1, 2. So my mobility shifted. So everything that could go crazy did. And it was like, okay. And I was really angry at God. I remember one night sitting in my car, and my sister and my husband were there. The look on their faces, they don't know, but the look on their faces, to me, it would seem as if they're saying, okay, we've got to take her to Homewood because she's going to lose it. But I would sit and just cry in the car for hours, because in my mind, I'm like, God, I'm all right. Like, you're shifting things, and I'm good. Why are you shifting things? And one day I was driving. I was a workaholic, so that had to change. So the kids would always say, Mom's at work again, Mom's at work again. And I was okay with that. And so I decided I was going to go into work before I went to church. That's how rebellious I was. I always got to meet the needs of the clients, go into work. And I had severe nausea with the pregnancies. And can somebody get me this tissue, please, and thank you? And so as I'm there, oh, there it is. Thank you so much. As I'm there, driving in the car, and I was really arguing with God. And he literally took me back to my life in Jamaica in every aspect of my life, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And as I'm going through each scenario, the last thing I heard God say to me, aren't my plans for your life always greater anyway? And I thought, yeah. And then maybe in 2 seconds of that, I started throwing up again, and I said, thank you. Because it's like, I thought we had this worked out. And so because of the interesting dynamics of the pregnancy, we got to the latter stage of it, and they had to induce me. And what I've learned after the fact now is that if you're induced and it doesn't happen in that normal time, you're really now at risk, but they're not going to necessarily disclose that to you. So after a week of trying, the doctor says to me, oh, we have to do an emergency C-section today. And I'm one of those people, sometimes I can be over-analytical, I want to put things in perspective. And I said, I've kept on asking you guys, are we going to do a C-section? And you said no. So to surprise me now, I haven't mentally prepared, because I'm in control of this. And they said, no, we're going to do emergency C-section. I phoned my sister at work, and I'm like, okay, you got to come. We had another friend who's an OBGYN specialist. She was actually in town. She lives in the U.S., Canadian, but lives in the U.S. So she was home, and she came from Brampton, I believe. So we didn't do anything until she was there, because she knows the ins and outs of what was going to happen. They came together with my husband, and we prayed, and, we can do this. And so we did the surgery. I was good. And then about, say, 8:30, after everybody had gone home for the day, beautiful baby girl was born at 1:59, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, and quiet. She was so quiet. Now we'll have to talk about, she's not quite so quiet now, but at the time she was like this quiet baby. So everything was good until about 8:30 in the night. And then a pain hit my body, and it was a pain I've never experienced. A pain really, really started hitting my body, and I tried getting the attentions of the nurses and stuff, like, I'm having some pain. She's like, oh, well, take your meds and you'll be fine. but the pain wouldn't go away. And it kept on going, and it kept on going. And I messaged my mom, who's in the healthcare field in the States, and I said, Mom, my body is hurting, and this isn't good. She's like, okay, we'll go back to the nurses and tell them what you're feeling and see what they'll do. I went back, and she's like, well, you just have to wait because your pain meds are, regimented. You have to take them at a specific time. But pain wouldn't leave my body. And so by the time my sister got back to the hospital, about 9 in the morning, I was wailing as if I was in full labor. And they couldn't find what was going on. And so I did about 4 CT scans. My doctor told me after the fact the equivalent of about 125 radiation treatments. And they were just going back and forth trying to figure out what was going on. I was there for about a week. So Monday night, my heart was racing with a fever. Tuesday, I was totally swollen, thighs all the way down, totally swollen. Wednesday, the hemoglobin count was just still going down. And by Thursday, I said to my husband, I want to go home. This is not healthy for me. I just want to go home. I wasn't great to go home, but I thought I can't stay in this hospital bed anymore. I'm done. I want to go home. So we got home the Thursday night. And one of the couple of things that stood out for me that night was when my sister was leaving, she was downstairs after she and my husband tucked me in. And as I'm laying there and she said, I'll see you tomorrow, I remember saying the words, okay, I'll see you when you come back. She says, are you okay? I said, I'm just winded. Didn't think anything of it. Friday morning, I got up and I phoned a friend of mine who's a nurse, and I phoned him because the medication that they'd given me was interesting. I'm like, I'm nursing, so they usually tell you, if you're nursing, don't do this or don't do that. I'm going, why does this, again, over-analytical me, what are they giving me? What is it for? Ask Google doctor. These clash. And he heard my voice. So he said, come on camera. I want to see you. And he's been a great friend of mine in the nursing field, and he also plays guitar for me at times. And he said, come on camera, I need to see you. I want to see your incision. I said, no. If you were in the hospital and you saw me, fine. But no, my friend, we are not that close where I'm going to show you my incision. He said, no, but come on camera, I want to see you. He said, I want to see the meds and stuff. Just come on camera. But what I didn't know at the time was life was fleeing my body. So I'm talking to him, and he's noticing my patterns of how I'm breathing. And he says, okay, you want to go back to the hospital? I said, okay. My husband had gone to drop the kids off at school. I said, I'll go when Johan comes back. He said, no. I said, but, I'm here with a baby. He goes, can Natalie, my sister, come by? I said, I can phone her. I phoned her. She said, well, because I took so many days off being with you in the hospital, I can't really take off today or take off right now, but, see if you can get your husband. And it was the one time you're trying to call, those times you're trying to find your husband, ladies, and it's just the one time he's not picking up the phone. So I'm phoning him, and he's not picking up. And so my friend said, okay, I'm going to leave Cambridge and get you. I said, no, you don't have to do that. I'm good. He said, no, I'm going to come pick you up. I said, no, don't worry about it. I'm good. So I waited till my husband came home. The baby was a week. And I said to him, Steph thinks I should go back to the hospital, but I'm not going back down there because I've had a week of hell. I'm not going back. I said, are you sure? I said, no, I'm not going back. I'm not. Since the baby was a week old, we had to take her in for a week checkup with the pediatrician. And as I'm sitting with the pediatrician checking on my daughter, she looks at me. And she does her checks, and then she says, okay, when you leave here, I need you to go back to the hospital. I said, okay. She said, no, I want you to go straight to the hospital. Truth be told, as much as I was now, looking through different eyes, with the Lord's perspective, I wasn't gracious because my husband wanted to take me straight to the hospital. I said, babe, I need you to stop at Tim's. He said, no. And I'm like, all I want is a cup of coffee. Can somebody just honor what I'm asking? He says, I'm not stopping. I'm taking you back to the doctor. It's a good thing he did. So it was the first time I went to the hospital, and you get to triage right there, and then, they filter who's going where, what, when. They looked at me, they took a few vital signs, and then they walked me straight to the very back. I've never seen the very back of the hospital room. And by the time I got to the back, they put you on all these machines, and they had an x-ray set up for me to go I don't think I waited 15 minutes. And then they gave me a few minutes to wait for the results, and the doctor came in the room. And then he says, in a very calm way, he says, all right, I want to let you know you have some clots in your lungs. And for that very first time, I literally felt like every ounce of air left my body. And all that time, it was like, I could feel myself hyperventilating. I remember phoning my sister. My husband was, getting the kids from school. And I was just like, okay, it's going to be okay. And I remember freaking out. And so I was admitted to the respiratory ward. And while I was there, it was like, okay, you're trying to stay in that zen of praying. All things work together for the good of those who are called. You know what I mean? And you're really trying to stay positive. I'm hearing and knowing that now I'm statistic. I have clots in my lungs. So undetected, that would be it. And so I'm in the hospital and I'm really crying. And my pastor I call him my pastor / brother from another mother. He came, and it was the first time I think I saw my father-in-law got emotional about me. It was never, it was like he was looking at me and you could see it. The sadness on their faces. My sister came, but then my sister literally moved out of her house, left her young child. So her son is a year older than my daughter. She literally moved into my house because somebody had to take care of the baby and the kids if my husband's down at the hospital with me. And as she's there with them, trying to create some sort of stability, like mom's in the hospital, keeping everybody calm, I remember phoning my mother in New Jersey, and I think as soon as I started talking, but she could hear my breathing and stuff. And she's like, listen, don't worry. She's like, listen, I'll say it in dialect. She said, every corner of the world praying for you. She said, I call everybody. She said, every corner you look, somebody praying for you. Translated, the world is praying for me. And it was the first time heaven was bombarded with my name, at least to me, at the same time that people were all conditionally praying for me. While I was in the hospital, every time I run into these ruts in my life, the only thing I know to do very, very, very well without thinking is singing. And as I was in the hospital, I was just singing and ministering songs and just singing to myself. And a song came to me at about 4:15 a.m. And I thought, you can tell how sometimes we singers are a little bit vain, because as much as I was feeling crappy, I thought, I've got to record this. Not thinking about my life is leaving, I just thought, no, I've got to record this. And so I was singing, and I share this all the time. There was a lovely elderly lady in my room. I could hear her talking to her family, like early in the day. I could hear when her family came to visit, she was telling them, the daughter said, did you get some sleep? Because apparently the guy that was there before was just coughing relentlessly. And so she's like, oh, this one's not too bad. She sings. And then in my heart, and I shared with my sister all the time, I really wanted to share back with her daughter, your mama snores. But I was singing. And the next song I'll do is the one I wrote in my hospital bed. And it ministered to my spirit, because at that time I realized I had to let everything go, because at this point I am no longer in control of my life. And so this next song I will share with you. It's called Purify. And God just downloaded some words. It's simple words, but it was the only thing that could have ministered to me, because I hadn't slept. And I hope you do feel the same when it ministers to your spirit. Purify, purify, purify me, Jesus. Send your fire from on high, even now, Lord Jesus. Jesus, in my heart, in my life, even now, Lord Jesus. I'll go to the bridge. Holy Spirit, have your way. Holy Spirit, have your way. Holy Spirit, please have your way in me, in me. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Lord Jesus, for everything you do in my life, Lord Jesus. It gets me every time. It gets me every time because at 4:15 in the morning, that's all I had. I wasn't technically alone, but outside of the other lady in my room, I was alone, and all I had was my voice and Jesus, and I just sang. And so, as a result of that change in my life, and you can play softly, as a result of that change in my life, I realized that, okay, girl, there is more for you to do. That God didn't just keep me from those hurdles in Jamaica, which should have taken me out. He didn't bring me all the way to New Jersey and to Canada for me to be self-absorbed and, thinking it is about me and my talents. God had to do a shift, and sometimes, he's really trying to tug you along like, okay, Verese, let's just get on the 401 and get to Paris. But because of my rebellion of trying to do things my way, life shifted. And once I came into that recognition of my life had to change, I knew I wanted more. And I had to do more, and I had to pursue God in a different way and see things differently. And the malice spirit that I had, I knew I had to let that go. The unforgiving spirit I had to let that go. And in trying to do what God commissioned me to do, I had to let me go in a lot of ways. And so over the last few years, I've been struggling. Sometimes you hear people talk about ministry, and what is my ministry, and what is my calling, and what is my stuff. God has given us each, equipped us each individually with amazing gifts and talents, and it's how we come together collectively to do those things. And this year, fortunately for me, a friend of mine had introduced me to Share World. And some of you know them, some of you don't. Some of you know them by the Gideons, who I've partnered with. And if you go to the hotel, God bless them, there's a Bible in a hotel. But those simple Bibles that you see in the hotels do much more than that. Last year alone, they've actually distributed just under 2.1 million Bibles around the world. And for us as believers, we know if nothing else identifies us, the Bible is what identifies us. That's our blueprint. That's our go-to. That's our, okay, God, I've got to take you at your word. And so when I sat with Nicole, who's my team rep, we had a very powerful conversation. And she's like, Verese, oh my gosh, I can't believe you haven't been doing this a long time. But I said, I know there's more for me to do. And I may not sing to millions, and that's okay. Like, I'm totally fine with that. But for somebody hearing about Jesus, and the Jesus that literally rescued me when I was literally in the balance between life and death, I really want people to hear about Jesus. I really want people to know about Jesus.